What if I told you that demonic possession isn't just about one cursed soul, but something that can jump from person to person like a deadly virus, infecting entire communities and leaving a trail of madness in its wake? Welcome back to another terrifying exploration into the paranormal. Today, we're diving into one of the most disturbing concepts in supernatural horror: contagious possession. Unlike traditional possession stories where a single victim is targeted by a malevolent entity, these cases involve something far more sinister: a demonic force that spreads like an epidemic, jumping from host to host, consuming everything in its path.
For continuing to watch the video, please subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Thank you for watching The Witch's Book: Dark Tales.
Throughout history, there have been documented cases of mass possessions, demonic contagions, and supernatural plagues that have devastated entire towns. These aren't just stories. They're documented events that have left investigators, religious authorities, and even skeptics struggling to find rational explanations. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about possession. These are the stories of the possession that spreads like a disease. The Loudun Possessions. France, 1634. Our journey begins in 17th century France, in the small town of Loudun. This case remains one of the most well-documented instances of contagious possession in history, and it's absolutely terrifying. It started with Sister Jeanne des Anges, the prioress of the Ursuline convent in Loudun. In 1632, she began experiencing disturbing visions and convulsions. She claimed that the ghost of Father Urbain Grandier, a local priest who had been accused of sorcery, was visiting her at night, tormenting her with unholy desires and demonic whispers. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The possession didn't stay confined to Sister Jeanne. Within weeks, other nuns in the convent began exhibiting the same symptoms. They writhed on the ground, spoke in languages they'd never learned, displayed superhuman strength, and engaged in behavior that shocked even the most hardened observers. The nuns would bark like dogs, contort their bodies into impossible positions, and speak with voices that weren't their own. They claimed to be possessed by multiple demons with names like Asmodeus, the demon of lust, and Behemoth, the demon of gluttony. The entity seemed to have a consciousness, an intelligence that allowed it to coordinate attacks across multiple victims simultaneously. What made this case particularly notable was how the possession seemed to spread through proximity and suggestion. Nuns who had been perfectly healthy would suddenly fall into fits after witnessing the possessed behavior of their sisters. It was as if the demonic entity had found a way to replicate itself, using fear and hysteria as its transmission vector. The Catholic Church sent numerous exorcists to deal with the outbreak. Father Jean-Joseph Surin, one of the most experienced exorcists of his time, spent months trying to free the nuns from their affliction. But something unexpected happened. Father Surin himself became possessed. The demon, it seemed, could jump from the nuns to their would-be savior. Father Surin's possession was so severe that he suffered for the rest of his life. He wrote about feeling as if two souls inhabited his body, his own and that of the demon. He described it as a living nightmare, where he was fully conscious but unable to control his own actions. The demon would use his mouth to speak blasphemies, his hands to write obscene messages, all while the real Father Surin screamed silently inside his own mind. The outbreak in Loudun lasted for years. It only ended after Urbain Grandier was executed for witchcraft in 1634, burned at the stake before a massive crowd. Whether Grandier was truly responsible or simply a scapegoat remains debated to this day. But what's undeniable is that something spread through that convent like wildfire, consuming everyone it touched. The Loudun case set a precedent. It showed that possession could be contagious, that it could spread through communities like a plague. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last time humanity would witness such a phenomenon. The Demon of Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Most people know about the Salem witch trials, but few understand the full scope of what was described as a spreading supernatural affliction that gripped the town in terror. It began in January 1692 in the household of Reverend Samuel Parris. His daughter Betty, age 9, and his niece Abigail Williams, age 11, began having fits. They would scream, throw objects, make strange sounds, and contort their bodies in painful-looking positions. Local physician William Griggs examined them and found no medical explanation. His diagnosis was chilling. The evil hand is upon them. But here's what most history books gloss over. The affliction spread rapidly. Within weeks, other girls in Salem Village began showing identical symptoms. Ann Putnam Jr., Elizabeth Hubbard, Mercy Lewis, and several others all fell into the same pattern of fits and convulsions. They claimed to see specters of witches tormenting them, invisible to everyone else but horrifyingly real to the afflicted. The possessed girls described being pricked with pins by invisible hands, choked by spectral forces, and tormented by demons that took the form of community members. What's particularly disturbing is how coordinated their possessions seemed. Multiple girls would have fits simultaneously, often naming the same witch at the same time, despite being in different locations. Contemporary accounts describe scenes that sound like something from a horror movie. During court proceedings, the afflicted girls would suddenly fall to the ground in unison, screaming that the accused witch's specter was attacking them. If the accused made a gesture, the girls would mirror it, as if controlled by the same force. When the accused clenched their fist, the girls would cry out in pain, claiming they were being squeezed. When the accused bit their lip, the girls would show bite marks on their own arms. This wasn't random hysteria. It was synchronized, as if a single entity was puppeteering multiple victims at once. The phenomenon was so convincing that it led to the execution of 20 innocent people and the imprisonment of hundreds more. Modern historians have tried to explain Salem as mass hysteria or ergot poisoning, but these explanations don't fully account for the specificity and coordination of the possessions. Why did it only affect certain individuals? Why did it spread in such a predictable pattern? And why did it end as suddenly as it began? Some paranormal researchers suggest that Salem was ground zero for a demonic outbreak, possibly triggered by occult practices the girls had been dabbling in with Tituba, Reverend Parris's Caribbean slave. According to testimony, Tituba had taught the girls fortune-telling techniques and other practices that would have been considered witchcraft. Perhaps they opened a door that should have remained closed, allowing something to enter our world, something that could spread from person to person through fear and suggestion. The Salem outbreak shows us something crucial about contagious possession. It thrives on fear. The more people believed in the possession, the more it spread. Fear became the carrier, the mechanism of transmission. And once an entire community believes in the presence of evil, that evil can become very, very real. The Demon Nun, Romania, 1950s. In the mountains of Romania, there's a monastery with a dark history that inspired one of the most terrifying horror movies in recent years. But the real story is far more disturbing than anything Hollywood could create. In the 1950s, during the communist persecution of religious institutions in Romania, a convent in the remote Transylvanian countryside became the site of a horrifying possession outbreak. The convent was already isolated, cut off from the outside world by harsh winters and government restrictions. The nuns lived in near-total seclusion, devoted to prayer and penance. It started with Sister Maria, a young nun who had recently taken her final vows. She began experiencing nightmares of a demonic presence in the convent's ancient catacombs. In her dreams, a figure dressed in a nun's habit but with a face of pure evil would visit her, whispering blasphemies and making obscene propositions. Sister Maria tried to dismiss these as mere nightmares, products of an overactive imagination. But then the nightmares began happening while she was awake. Sister Maria would be praying in the chapel when she'd see the demonic nun standing in the shadows, watching her with eyes that glowed like embers. She'd be alone in her cell when she'd feel icy hands grabbing her throat, choking her until she passed out. She started speaking in ancient languages during her sleep, languages that scholars later identified as forms of Latin and Aramaic that hadn't been spoken in over 1,000 years. The Mother Superior tried to keep Sister Maria's affliction quiet, hoping prayer and fasting would cure her. But the entity had other plans. Within a month, 3 other nuns began reporting identical experiences. They all saw the same demonic nun, all heard the same blasphemous whispers, all woke up with the same mysterious bruises and scratches on their bodies. The entity seemed to have a particular hatred for the sacred. Crucifixes would turn upside down in the possessed nun's presence. Holy water would boil when they touched it. The communion wafers would turn black in their mouths. It was as if the demon was using these faithful women to mock the very faith they held dear. What makes this case particularly terrifying is the contagion pattern. The possession spread through direct contact. If a possessed nun touched another sister, within days that sister would also fall under the entity's control. It was like a supernatural infection with a specific transmission method. The Romanian Orthodox Church eventually sent a team of exorcists to the convent. What they found horrified them. Nearly half the nuns were possessed, and the entity was growing stronger with each new host. The exorcists described it as trying to fight a hydra, cast out the demon from one nun, and it would immediately jump to another. During one mass exorcism, all the possessed nuns began speaking in perfect unison, with a voice that wasn't human. They delivered a message that chilled everyone present. We are legion. We are many. We spread like plague. Where one falls, 2 rise. You cannot stop us. We will consume all. The exorcism took weeks and nearly killed several of the priests involved. They had to isolate each possessed nun and perform individual exorcisms while keeping them away from the others to prevent the demon from jumping to new hosts. 3 nuns died during the process. 2 exorcists were hospitalized with what was described as spiritual wounds. Psychological trauma so severe they never returned to ministry. In the end, the Mother Superior made a horrifying decision. She ordered that the convent be sealed, with the most severely possessed nuns locked inside. The building was consecrated and then abandoned, left to crumble in the mountains. To this day, locals refuse to go near the ruins, claiming they can still hear the sound of women chanting in Latin, their voices echoing through the empty halls. The Romanian case demonstrates something crucial about contagious possession. Physical contact can serve as a transmission vector. The demon needed touch to spread, like a virus jumping from host to host. And once it had infected enough people, it became nearly impossible to contain. The Smurl Family Haunting, Pennsylvania, 1986. In the 1980s, the Smurl family became the center of one of the most documented cases of possession in modern American history. Their story was so disturbing that it was featured in newspapers, books, and television specials worldwide. But what most people do not know is that the demonic entity that tormented the Smurls didn't just target one family member, it systematically possessed multiple people, turning their home into a living nightmare. Jack and Janet Smurl moved into a duplex home in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, with their 4 daughters. Jack's parents, John and Mary Smurl, lived in the other half of the duplex. At first, everything seemed normal, but in 1974, strange things began happening. It started small, televisions turning on by themselves, carpets being mysteriously stained, scratches appearing on furniture overnight. The family dismissed these as normal household quirks. But the phenomena escalated quickly. The family began hearing footsteps in empty rooms, voices whispering in the walls, and the sound of someone walking up and down the stairs when everyone was accounted for. Then came the physical attacks. Janet Smurl was the first to be directly targeted. She reported being grabbed by invisible hands, pushed downstairs, and even sexually assaulted by an unseen entity. The attacks were so violent that she sustained visible injuries, bruises, scratches, and bite marks that appeared spontaneously. But the entity wasn't satisfied with one victim. It began targeting other family members. Jack Smurl claimed he was levitated off his bed, held against his will in midair while the demon whispered threats in his ear. Their teenage daughters reported being touched inappropriately by invisible hands, hearing voices telling them to hurt themselves and others. What makes the Smurl case a prime example of contagious possession is how the entity seemed to move between family members, possessing them temporarily to commit acts they'd never normally do. Jack, a devout Catholic and gentle father, would suddenly become violent and aggressive, attacking his wife and children before snapping out of it with no memory of what he'd done. Janet would wake up to find herself standing over her sleeping children with a knife in her hand, with no recollection of how she got there. The family's 2 dogs and their pet bird all died under mysterious circumstances, and the house itself seemed to be decaying at an accelerated rate. Walls would ooze a foul-smelling substance, toilets would overflow with what looked like blood, and the temperature would drop suddenly to near freezing even in the middle of summer. The Smurls contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigators. The Warrens concluded that the family was dealing with not 1 but 4 separate demonic entities, and that these entities were using the family members as hosts, jumping between them to cause maximum chaos and suffering. Priests were brought in to perform multiple exorcisms on both the house and the family members. But every time an exorcism was performed, the entity would simply retreat temporarily before returning with renewed fury. It seemed to be feeding off the family's fear and desperation, growing stronger with each failed attempt to banish it. The possession spread beyond the Smurl household. Neighbors began reporting strange experiences, seeing shadowy figures in the windows of the Smurl home, hearing screams when the house was supposed to be empty, and even experiencing attacks themselves after visiting the family. One neighbor claimed that after trying to help the Smurls, he began having violent outbursts at home, attacking his own family in fits of rage he couldn't control. The Smurl case lasted for over a decade, from 1974 to 1989. The family eventually moved out of the house, but the damage was done. Jack and Janet's marriage was strained to the breaking point. Their daughters suffered from PTSD, and the family was never quite the same. The duplex itself gained a reputation as one of the most haunted locations in Pennsylvania, with subsequent residents reporting similar phenomena. What the Smurl case teaches us is that demonic entities do not just possess individuals, they can possess entire families, entire households. They can create an environment so saturated with negative energy that anyone who enters becomes susceptible to influence and attack. The possession spreads through proximity, through shared space, through the very air people breathe. The Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic, Tanzania, 1962. Now you might be thinking, what does a laughter epidemic have to do with demonic possession? But bear with me, because this case is one of the strangest and most unsettling examples of how something can spread from person to person in ways that defy rational explanation. In January 1962, at a mission-run boarding school for girls in Kashasha, Tanzania, 3 students started laughing uncontrollably. Within hours, the laughter had spread to 95 of the school's 159 students. The laughter would come in fits lasting from a few minutes to several hours, and it wasn't pleasant laughter. Students described feeling compelled to laugh against their will, even though they felt no joy. Many were crying while laughing, begging for it to stop, but unable to control their bodies. The school was forced to close on March 18, 1962. The affected students returned to their home villages, and that's when things took a truly disturbing turn. The laughter spread to the villages. Parents, siblings, and neighbors of the affected students began exhibiting the same symptoms. Within months, the epidemic had spread to over 1,000 people across multiple communities. But it wasn't just laughter. Those affected also experienced respiratory problems, random screaming fits, crying, and violent behavior. Some people reported feeling as if something had taken control of their bodies, forcing them to laugh while their minds screamed in terror. The epidemic lasted for 18 months and affected 14 different schools and thousands of individuals. Medical professionals were baffled. They tried everything from sedatives to quarantine, but nothing worked. The laughter would stop temporarily, only to return with renewed intensity. Eventually, the epidemic simply burned out on its own, ending as mysteriously as it had begun. Now, conventional medicine classifies this as mass psychogenic illness, a form of mass hysteria. But many local people, including some educated observers, believed something more sinister was at work. They claimed that the initial outbreak was the result of a curse placed on the school by someone who'd been offended by the missionaries. They pointed out that the pattern of spread, starting at a Christian school and moving to the families of the converted, suggested a spiritual attack on those who had abandoned traditional beliefs. Some paranormal researchers have suggested that the Tanganyika epidemic was actually a form of demonic possession that manifested as compulsive laughter. In many African spiritual traditions, certain malevolent entities are known to cause uncontrollable behavior as a way of mocking their victims and demonstrating their power. The fact that the laughter was unwanted, that it caused distress rather than joy, suggests something more sinister than mere hysteria. What makes this case relevant to our discussion of contagious possession is the pattern of spread. It moved from person to person through social networks, affecting those with close connections to the initially afflicted. It couldn't be stopped by quarantine or medical intervention, and it eventually burned out when it ran out of susceptible hosts, much like a disease outbreak. Whether you believe this was mass hysteria or something supernatural, the Tanganyika case shows us that something can spread through communities that isn't physical, isn't visible, but is nonetheless real and devastating. It shows us that the line between psychological and spiritual contagion may be much blurrier than we'd like to believe. Modern cases and scientific investigations. In recent years, there have been several documented cases of what appears to be contagious possession, and surprisingly, some scientists are taking these cases seriously. In 2016, a high school in Peru had to be evacuated when nearly 200 students began exhibiting symptoms of possession simultaneously. They reported seeing a man in black walking the hallways, felt hands grabbing them from behind when no one was there, and experienced fainting spells and convulsions. Local priests performed mass exorcisms, and the phenomenon eventually subsided. In Colombia, in 2017, an entire town was affected by what locals called a demonic plague. It started with a group of teenagers playing with a Ouija board, and within days, dozens of people were claiming to be possessed. The symptoms were eerily consistent: speaking in unknown languages, superhuman strength, aversion to religious symbols, and knowledge of information they shouldn't have had access to. What's fascinating is that some researchers are now approaching these cases from a scientific perspective, trying to understand the mechanism of transmission. Dr. Robert Bartholomew, a medical sociologist, has spent decades studying mass psychogenic illness and believes that while the symptoms are real, they're psychologically rather than supernaturally induced. However, even he admits that some cases defy easy explanation. Neurologists have discovered that humans have mirror neurons, brain cells that activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. This could explain how witnessing someone in the throes of what appears to be possession could trigger similar symptoms in observers. We're neurologically wired to mimic what we see, especially in high-stress situations. But this neurological explanation doesn't account for all the phenomena. How do you explain knowledge of languages never learned? How do you explain physical strength beyond normal human capacity? How do you explain the consistent description of entities across multiple unconnected victims? Some parapsychologists propose that we're dealing with what they call psychic contagion, the idea that strong emotional or spiritual energy can be transmitted from person to person, much like a virus. If one person opens themselves up to a malevolent entity, that entity gains a foothold in our reality. It can then use that person as a beacon, attracting susceptible individuals and spreading its influence. This theory suggests that fear, trauma, and stress make individuals more susceptible to psychic contagion. When someone is in a heightened emotional state, their psychological defenses are down, making them vulnerable to external influences, whether you want to call those influences demons, malevolent thought forms, or interdimensional entities. The Catholic Church, while more cautious in recent years, still maintains that genuine demonic possession can spread under certain circumstances. Father Gabriele Amorth, the Vatican's chief exorcist until his death in 2016, documented several cases where demons appeared to jump from one person to another during exorcism attempts. He warned that demons are intelligent, strategic, and capable of coordinating attacks across multiple victims. What we're seeing is a convergence of traditional religious understanding and modern scientific inquiry. Both camps acknowledge that something real is happening in these cases, even if they disagree on the underlying cause. Whether it's supernatural entities or psychological contagion, the effect is the same. Something that spreads from person to person, causing genuine suffering and disruption. Conclusion: protection and prevention. So, after hearing all these terrifying stories, you're probably wondering, how do you protect yourself from contagious possession? How do you avoid becoming a host for something malevolent? First, recognize the warning signs. Contagious possession often begins with subtle changes: unexplained mood swings, disturbing nightmares, a sudden aversion to religious symbols or practices, gaps in memory, and the feeling that you're not entirely in control of your own thoughts and actions. Second, understand the risk factors. Contagious possession tends to spread in communities where fear is high, where people are already stressed or traumatized, and where there's already a belief in the supernatural. If you're in an environment where people are claiming to be possessed, be aware that your own suggestibility increases. Third, protect your spiritual and psychological well-being. This isn't about being religious, it's about maintaining strong mental boundaries. Meditation, therapy, strong social connections, and a sense of purpose all help create a psychological immune system that makes you less susceptible to external influences. If you suspect you or someone you know is experiencing possession, contagious or otherwise, seek help immediately. Contact religious authorities if that aligns with your beliefs. Most major religions have protocols for dealing with possession. Also, contact mental health professionals, because even if something supernatural is occurring, the psychological impact still needs to be addressed. Avoid dabbling in occult practices without proper knowledge and protection. Many cases of contagious possession begin when someone, often out of curiosity or boredom, uses a Ouija board, attempts to contact spirits, or performs rituals without understanding what they're really doing. It's like opening doors without checking what's on the other side. Finally, trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, leave. If a person makes you feel inexplicably uncomfortable or drained, limit your exposure. If you witness something that appears to be genuine possession, don't assume you're immune to whatever is affecting the victim. The stories we've explored today, from the convents of France to the schools of Tanzania, from colonial Salem to modern Peru, all teach us the same lesson: possession can be contagious. Whether it's demons, malevolent thought forms, or mass psychogenic illness, something can spread from person to person that fundamentally changes who they are and how they behave. The truth is, we still don't fully understand the nature of consciousness, the limits of human psychology, or the possibility of non-physical entities. We live in a strange universe where the line between mind and spirit, between individual and collective, is far more permeable than we'd like to believe. So the next time you hear about a case of possession, remember, it might not be just one person's problem. It might be something that can spread, something that can jump from host to host, looking for the next vulnerable soul to consume. Stay safe out there. Keep your mind strong, your spirit stronger, and your doors closed to things that knock in the dark, because you never know what might be trying to get in. And if you ever find yourself surrounded by people exhibiting signs of possession, remember this: fear is the carrier. Panic is the transmission vector. The moment you give in to terror, you open yourself up to infection. Thank you for watching this deep dive into contagious possession. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves supernatural horror. And let me know in the comments: do you believe possession can spread like a disease? Have you ever experienced anything that made you question the boundaries between the natural and supernatural? Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep your wits about you. The world is stranger than we imagine, and sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that might just be true.